Welcome one and all to Chips and Grits. Those of you that signed in and those of you who are going to watch it later, appreciate that. Today's topic is how do you repair your chips and your cracks? Just as a reminder, we're going to try to keep this to about an hour, um, so things don't ramble too long. And we all know we have other things planned to do for the day. And so the question is, who would like to get started this morning? Oh, let me change the view. There we go. Everybody's talking at once, huh? Well, from my standpoint, when I get into a crack, I use the first go-to is probably super glue if it's not too big. Um, that works well. The challenge there is to keep it from bleeding over into the rest of the wood and staining it. Um, and then if it is too big, then I end up going to my probably my pot, putting some epoxy resin in it and letting it cure out that way, and then going back to the lathe. So fortunately, I've got a couple options to choose from, and it's a function of how big the crack is in terms of which ones I'll select. So
Bruce, do you do anything to color your CA glue? Because I find when I just use CA glue, you get this big clear gap across the wood. It just doesn't look right.
I don't typically color the CA. I do the resin, and I've got several powders, so I can pick and choose what color I'd like to have with that. I know some of the people use the brass shavings, some use wood chips, um, but I typically haven't done anything with the CA itself.
What I
Bruce,
do,
I've had the same concern and over the years, I don't like the clear showing up there, so I will even if it's a real narrow crack, I'll rub in some sawdust or my current favorite is copper powder and then use CA glue because at least it gives a little coloring and still gives you the strength of the CA.
Have
I
you
like
turned,
the sawdust also. I always have a bunch of sawdust around. I'll just take a pinch of it off the lathe and mix it in with the 5-minute epoxy that I make up and just use that to fill the crack and then finish it from there.
are you filling these cracks after you've turned the piece? Because if you try to fill the cracks beforehand, usually you don't get deep into the crack and you just turn away your repair.
I usually it's oftentimes a mix. If I think I can get it in deep enough that it won't turn away, I'll go ahead and do it. Sometimes I'll just go ahead and do the turning and expose the crack more. Other times I still end up having to refill some as I've turned away some of the outside of the crack. Um, One interesting thing, I've for several years I collected sawdust, actually the real fine powder. I collected off of my lathe bed and have different powders for different woods. But I found that sometimes I just can't get the right mix and match. And what I end up using, if I don't use the copper powder, I'll use ground coffee. It seems
Yeah.
to match colors very well without having to try to match the exact color. I've been very happy with those results. Bruce, there
Can
are
actually
times
buy
also
colored
when if
CA
the
glue.
crack is wide enough, I will actually use a pick to push the powder down as far as possible before I put the CA in it, trying to avoid exposing that as I turn it later.
You find the CA will penetrate deeply. Amazingly, there's actually some science behind this. I came across an article that suggested that thin CA glue will only penetrate about 1 millimeter or 2 into that dust.
Interesting. A couple of years ago, we did a similar chips and grits, and I actually made some saw cuts in a piece of wood, just 2x2, I think, or 1x2, and tried different powders, and I used CA and epoxy, and I forget what else. And then I cut it. After it had dried, I cut through that to see how deep it did penetrate. In most cases, it only penetrated about 1/8 of an inch at the most.
Okay.
Ken, do you find that affects the curing time of the CA when you mix something in it?
I have not, but I also use an accelerator, and I also layer the powder and CA whenever I can. With regard to staining, that's always been a bigger concern. And I learned from Starbond that if you first spritz it with the accelerator before you put the CA in, it significantly reduces that bleed. And so I've been using that for a while, very successfully.
I just like to say one thing on what I typically do when there's cracks, though. I always will fill with the real thin CA. That gets deeper in there, and then depends on how much it is. I'll put maybe the other CA over it, the thicker stuff after that dries in there. I use accelerator on it too. But if it's a real crack of an 1/8 inch wide or something like that, if it's that's anywhere close, I always go with the structural epoxy. Put in there to make sure it doesn't come apart. I did it all as long as I've been turning, and it's I've been happy with it.
When I put my epoxy, 5-minute epoxy with the sawdust in, I've already mixed that up with a toothpick, and I just jam it right down in with a toothpick and let it stand a little proud of the surface so that I can finish it right along the rest of the surface.
Nick, the one thing I don't like about the 5-minute epoxy is that you got to work quick to get it in there. I mean, it's tough. It sets up quick enough that I've run into problems with it when trying to do something deep enough with it. So that's why I actually use the structural. It doesn't dry that quick. It has a chance to run deep. That's how I like to do it. But
Okay, I agree because I've got both the 5-minute and the longer curing epoxy, and depending on the size of the crack that I'm trying to fill and the area and the anticipated work time, I'll use one or the other.
right.
I've got a JB Weld. I've got a JB Weld 5-minute epoxy. Takes like 20 minutes for it to start setting up. And that's in my shop. I keep it about 68 degrees in here. And it seems to stay pretty fluid until about 20 minutes before it even starts getting tacky. So I don't know. That might be a good choice for something that you want a little extended time. Was it something I said?
So I have a question, Bruce Peak. A few years ago, when we were talking about cracks, you talked about putting a drop of, it seems to me it was acetone or something with epoxy to thin it out. Do you remember what that tip was?
If you add acetone to epoxy, it will thin it, and you only want to add a couple of drops. The other secret is you want to, if you're going to do this, do it immediately after mixing the epoxy. Otherwise, if you wait about 5 or 8 minutes, you get more of a thermal reaction that really heats up the epoxy. And I don't know the chemistry behind that, but just a couple of drops of acetone would allow it to really seep way down into the crack.
So is there any thing to be said about if you have a vacuum and a vacuum chuck and you're trying to put cracks on a bowl, do you put the bowl under a vacuum and fill from the outside to try to, especially if the crack goes all the way through, to help pull it down into the cracks? Has anybody ever done that?
I didn't use a vacuum check, but I have used a shop vac.
Same theory, same thing though, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And it pulls it through. Yeah, it went all the way through.
I'm always nervous about messing up my vacuum pump.
Susan, how do you control what goes through, and does it spread out then on the inside, on the vacuum side? Do you put tape over it or do anything like that to prep the wood so you're getting minimum staining?
I have used the accelerator to spray around so it wouldn't stain as much, because that really does work for me. And when I was using it, it wasn't a thin CA, it was a medium. And so I was having the issues of it not going through. And so I'm like, I heard from somebody, I think it was at school, where they said they used a shop vac or a vacuum. And so I tried it, and I was scared at first. So I just barely put the shop vac up again. I just did it little by little. And then I started to see the CA go down. Because prior to that, I thought it was dry. And so I was using the air hose around it. And then I had CA everywhere because it wasn't completely dry all the way through. So I made a mess and I had to fix that up. And so then I tried the vacuum, and it really did pull it through. But I was real careful with the vacuum. I didn't just pop it up on the underside of my crack and let it go. I was just kind of watching.
So the CA glue, does it cure? Is it from a lack of oxygen that causes it to cure, or is it when it hits oxygen?
I don't think it either needs it or needs exclusion. It cures on its own. I don't think it's an oxygen contact issue.
My understanding is CA glue cures when it gets exposed to water. And so if you're living in Florida, using CA glue is a real problem. We have the beauty here, I'm sure you've all seen it, where you've applied it to a piece of wood that's dried for 3 years. There's just no moisture in it, and it takes forever for the CA to harden unless you use accelerator. So watch the moisture content, you're putting it on and see what happens. And you'll probably see, I've always found that affects curing time.
The other thing they
Many
say,
years ago, long before I started wood turning, a colleague of mine made a lot of balsa airplanes, and he used super glue on that. And he told me it required the moisture to actually cure correctly. So his technique was, before he would glue something, he would simply breathe on it, and that provided enough moisture to make the glue solidify quickly. I've looked to see a little bit more of the history on super glues, and because this guy told me that the original super glue was based on the glue that underwater critters like mollusks and others use to adhere to items underwater, and that's why it needed the water. But I've never seen any confirmation of that anywhere else. But since that time, I do try to make sure there's some moisture on any area that I'm trying to use CA on.
Yeah. On a safety article I did months ago, I read that the CA glue is dangerous because the moisture in your fingers, your lips, and all that stuff will cause it to cure almost instantly. And that's why people are always getting their fingers stuck.
That'd be me.
The other thing I heard at the symposium is once you open your CA glue, don't store it in the refrigerator. Because once it's open, the moisture in the refrigerator will start to harden the CA glue.
I've heard
I don't know.
that
I
too,
keep
Bruce,
mine in
but
the
I do
fridge
it
all the
anyway, and
time.
I've never had a
Stays
problem.
fresh. I keep mine in the refrigerator all the time, and it seems to stay fresh.
I've kept mine in the refrigerator too because I think it extends the life of it, but
Yeah.
that's what they said. So
Yeah.
I just keep mine in the shop and I don't put a cap on it for at least a couple of hours. It allows the CA to drain back in the bottle and it doesn't plug the spout nearly as often.
You know, you can get CA glue colored as well. They have dark CA glues. In fact, the college has some at really good price for a black CA. It's like $6 for an ounce or something. I thought that was a pretty good deal.
Yes, you can get colored, and in fact, Starbond now sells coloring agents. I think it's the same thing that's used in resin. But a caution about using colored CA is it takes much longer to cure. I have used a black CA in cracks before, turned it down, and found that I got splattered with black CA because it did not cure. So if you're using a colored CA, and Starbond actually advises us to always use an accelerator with it too.
Same thing happened to me. Same thing happened to me. I thought it was cured, turned on the lathe, went to the cleanup pass, and it was all over the place. I was like, what? Cleans up on acetone though.
I've stopped using the colored stuff for that reason. It's just as easy to put sawdust in a crack and fill it than try to use that stuff and wait forever.
There have been a few occasions where I've liked using I've had used both black and brown CA. If I've got a knot and it's got some small cracks around it, it helps to use one of those colors, and it's usually a narrow crack, not very deep, and it blends in very nicely with the rest of the knot coloring.
So you got somebody was mentioning using the spray to help prevent the stain, the accelerator. But I typically just have a little bottle of shellac and I put some on a paper towel and then wipe it around the crack and seal it with shellac and then put the CA on. That works good for stain prevention that I've seen.
Dave, I've tried that. I didn't have very good success with it. I don't know if my shellac wasn't thick enough or if I didn't let it dry enough, but I still had staining after using the shellac technique, and I haven't with the accelerator technique.
Has anyone tried the ultraviolet curing epoxies?
No, but I used to tie flies, and they use the ultraviolet stuff on flies. Works great.
Okay, well, maybe I'm the only one. It works great for shallow stuff. If it's more than 1/8 of an inch deep, you're not going to get it with that light. And even trying to layer it, it just takes too much patience. If you're doing deep, you might as well use the 5-minute epoxy. If you try to color it, it significantly extends the curing time. Like a mica powder, it'll cure on the surface, but then underneath it's just goop.
That's good to know.
I
Yeah,
see
that's
Steve, I
that's
see Steve Vaughn is holding up stuff from time to time. What have you got for us, Steve?
Well, I found out that I was muted, so I unmuted myself. What would you suggest on a large crack like this? When I turned this little weed pot, uh, there wasn't any cracks. And then I came out the following day and whoa, big crack like that. I did pick up some. Uh, has anyone ever used this before? Milliputty?
Yep.
And this is a sort of a turquoise color, so I thought I would maybe try that, maybe force it down in that deep crack. And
Yeah, that's good stuff. Lily pot.
I originally got this because I was gonna try to do an inlay with it and put it in. I saw a demonstration of that. And so would you think that would be a cure for this, or should I do? I was gonna just throw it in the wood pile, but anyhow, it's pretty
No,
deep.
that milliput should work. It's
Okay.
a good filler for thick areas.
What
Okay.
is milliput?
It's an epoxy.
Oxy.
And two-part epoxy that you have to blend together, kneading it together until it all blends the color perfectly, and then you force it in. I saw a person do that on an inlay on a bowl. He just made a nice groove, and then he made. They do it in several different ways. I've seen them take several different colors of the milliputty, and then they make little thin squares, and then they stack it on top of each other, and then they cut those squares, and then they stick them into the groove that they did, and it just gives it a really beautiful design when it dries, and then they turn it, and it comes out pretty well.
how hard does it cure? Is it easy to turn?
I've never used it yet, so but from what I've seen on demonstrations, it's rock hard.
Where do you get it?
Epoxy. I think I found it online, and
Okay.
Amazon, I think.
Yeah, you can get it at Amazon.
This is turquoise. They have it in white, black, red, blue, I think. But I've never used it yet, so that's why I wanted to show you guys this piece, and then it's a pretty big split. I'm hoping it won't split anymore, but do you think I should put maybe some maybe thick CA glue down in there first and then put the milliputty in, or?
No, I think that's too wide for thick CA glue.
Okay.
Kathy, what were you saying? You were muted.
I am
You're still
looking at
muted.
it. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm looking at it on Amazon. I have not heard of it, so I looked it up. You have to be careful which one you get, whether it's the plumbing putty or the epoxy putty. But it is actually a sculpting clay that comes in different colors. I might have to order it to try it. It sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's this is the epoxy. It's not for plumbing.
Yeah, but
It says epoxy, versatile epoxy putty, which is highly adhesive to most materials.
And cracks like that,
Mhm.
I would fill the crack with tissue paper until I got about a quarter inch or so from the top.
Mhm.
And then I have some stained epoxy that I would put on it, or with turquoise. I like using turquoise too, and that produces a nice effect. But I don't see a need to go an inch deep with epoxy,
Okay.
so I put
Yes.
some tissue underneath it.
Yeah.
Steve, I would let that dry for a few months before you try fixing it, because if you
Okay.
patch it and then it cracks some more, all that's wasted.
Yeah, this has been this way for probably a couple of months already, and I was just hoping it wasn't going to go any further, but I don't know. I was just about ready to throw it on the wood pile, but
Steve, for cracks, wider cracks, I have done what Phil is suggesting too. I've pushed, I've used string, I've used tissues, paper towels, something to push down into the crack far enough that it leaves only a quarter of an inch or less of the surface.
okay.
But I've also done that and then had to turn it later and turned into that tissue before.
Oh,
So you want to be careful that you got the depth correctly and you know how far down the tissue is before you
yeah.
fill it. And then be careful as you turn it. In
Mhm.
your case, I don't think you're going to be turning it again, so you're probably okay. But also, if that's a hollow form and it is hollow inside, beware if you're stuffing something in that crack, it's
Yeah.
going to want to just go right on into the inside and it won't give you the barrier that you need.
Okay.
I think turquoise would look beautiful with that crack.
Yeah, I'll give it a try. See what happens.
Anybody ever use Bondo for their cracks?
Hmm.
I had a cabinet maker suggest Bondo because he uses that sometimes for cabinet making. So I've done that on some big cracks, and it works kind of like the epoxy, but I don't have to use carbide tools on it. I can use any tool on it. With epoxy, I find I need to use carbide tools because it really dulls my tools.
Yeah.
I use Bondo on sculptural pieces, but I haven't used it on anything on the lathe.
Yeah. I haven't used it too much, but it you can't stain it or anything. Like it looks kind of a red wood when it dries.
Yeah, I use it on pieces that I intend to paint. So that hides a multitude of sins.
Yes, and it works real nice. Yeah, I'll probably use that on a piece I'm working on here now.
Yeah.
Steve, we want to see what you end up with later on.
Okay. Yeah, I just from you guys talking, I had another project I was doing that had some cracks in it like that. I don't know if you can see it. That I did what you guys were suggesting this morning. I used a little bit of this powder here, and then pushed it in there pretty good, and then sort of made like a little mountain or a little ridge on it, and then put the CA glue in it, and it came out okay.
You use the right technique there to build up a little bit above the surface.
Yes, I did.
That's what I always do with the copper powder too. By the way, if you're filling it with something, you do want to use the thin CA.
Yeah, that's what I did. I used the thin CA and just the mica powder, and it's filled the crack in pretty well.
So you use, talking about putting in a filler, you add the accelerator before the filler or after the filler and before the CA, or what's the sequence of CA, accelerator, prevent staining, and the filler? Does anyone have any techniques there?
Sean, what I've used is before I start to put anything in the crack, I will spray it with the accelerator so that it's on the surface of the outside of the crack. Then I'll start building it up inside the crack with whatever material, sawdust, copper powder, whatever I'm using. And I build it up progressively depending on how deep it is. If it's a wider crack, like what Steve was just showing on that vase, you want to put a layer in, use CA and accelerator, then build up another layer, put in a CA accelerator. So you build up layers at a time. And I've had pretty good success with that for most of the cracks I've filled.
That's a nice cup, David.
Yeah, I know who makes these.
Uh-huh.
I
I've
know
heard
where you
that.
can get them too.
Mhm.
License plates are coming too.
Okay.
Everybody ready to put a license plate on their car and truck? I know I am.
You know,
One
it's
of your
inter-
models you can show people.
In the house.
Hmm.
I go get it.
You know, it's interesting in this club, with the number of specialties that people have. We don't seem to have anybody who does repairs on their cracks with butterflies, or the other word for it is PEWAS, PEWAS. And I don't do it to be able to explain it, but there are people who really integrate it into uh, the design of their piece. And so it's a design element rather than just a filled crack. And there are kits that you can get uh, to use. You can even use a little Dremel to open up the butterfly shape, and then there are you can buy bags of butterflies to be able to do it. But yeah, it's interesting for the number of them that I see online that nobody here really seems to do it. Just a thought.
I have done it in the past. I've got the template that you use and you
Mm-hmm.
tape it onto the wood, and you have to really tape it on good so it doesn't tilt and all
Yeah.
that. And it works. But I just did it about 4 times and then I moved on to something else. I haven't done it since.
If
Well,
I
you
might
can.
chime in here, I have, I don't know if you can see it.
There they are.
Yeah, I made a mallet and I put butterflies this way, and then I swapped it around and did butterflies
Mm-hmm.
this way. And I find what, if you know you're going to use them, and if it's not necessarily to fill a crack, while the wood is a square or not round yet, you put the butterflies in then, and you make them deep. And then once you have the butterflies in, then you turn the piece, and then it will come out with the round shape.
Very nice. That's
Yeah,
a
I
good
would
tip.
do it. Go ahead. I would do it when I still have about 1/8 of an inch or more that I want to turn off. And like you said, the butterfly has to be about a 1/2 inch thick, you know, unless it's a really wide piece. But, you know, to make that curve and still be able to turn it off to make it round.
That looks very nice, Steve. I've never done that, but you may recall a year ago, last February, our IRD was Emiliano Achival from Hawaii, and he talked about that technique. Not that wasn't the focus of his IRD, but he also uses that technique, and he uses the Hawaiian term. What'd you call it, Dick? Pee-wee, or yeah. And
PEWA.
I think if you go to his website, he either has a video on how to do it or can direct you to places if you're interested in that technique. But Steve, that looks very nice. That's a nice embellishment for your mallet.
It might have to be a Tuesday demo, I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
That could be done.
I also used a biscuit cutter to cut slots in, and would just take thin slivers of wood that I would cut and fit into the crack. And that worked twice. And then for some reason after that, I could never get the slice or the biscuit cutter to not slide when I'm using it and just chews everything up.
Is that a Harbor Freight biscuit cutter and maybe it wore out?
No, it was a decent biscuit cutter. I think it must have just been me, but it was okay. I don't do a lot of that anyway.
Oh, look at that. Isn't that nice?
Do my Vanna White.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be at the next meeting.
Has anyone used any, like, I think there's a company called Easy Inlay. Have you used anything like that to fill a crack?
I got some of that in my cart on Amazon. I just haven't pulled the trigger yet.
Mm. Okay.
Comes in a box, a kit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's got good reviews. You can get like crushed rock with it, different things like that.
Okay.
Craft Supply also sells some kind of an inlay material. I forget what the name of it is, but it comes with different colors. Like you can get a turquoise inlay. I've not used it for cracks, but I did use it for filling a trough that I put on the top edge of a bowl once.
Mhm.
And it's a liquid. It'll settle to its own level. So it's like using, it is a resin, but
Mhm.
it comes in different colors.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess Mark's not here today, but he uses the not epoxy, what is it? The resin to
Mhm.
fill in cracks, and he puts it in his pressure pot
Yeah.
and takes care of it that way. And the newer people might not remember Phil Brown, but I've seen where he doesn't take out a crack. He just like use shoelaces on it,
Mm.
as a design element.
Mhm.
It looked pretty good.
I think there's
Yeah.
one in his gallery on the website that's done that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, at the last meeting with the wig stands, Heidi did that. She had a crack on the top of her wig stand, but turned it into a feather because she wood burned it and it made it as a feather.
Oh, okay. That, by the way, was a very good demo. I've watched it again because I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. But yeah, nicely done.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. That's the benefit of having things on our website. So we can
Yeah.
learn from watching them again. So thanks.
Susan, I'm
Um,
glad you mentioned that because I have used wood burning to hide cracks before.
mhm.
And it, depending on how you do that, I've done stippling, like maple leaves, and I will try to follow a crack and you make that look like the vein of a leaf. Other times, I've just incorporated up that crack into whatever I'm trying to wood burn. And it usually turns out to be a pretty good way to hide the crack.
So people have mentioned both resin um, and epoxy. Can you really tell the difference of which should be used in which incidences? Or are they the same product?
Well, I don't know how they are chemically. for me, it would just be, is it a crack I can fill with a 5-minute epoxy? Or is it about 10 cracks that is going to be too much of a pain in the butt because you have to let it cure each time? And if it's too much of a butt, I take it to Mark and make it his problem.
So curing time and how big it is are the two issues then.
Yeah.
Yeah, because your resin, when you're doing that, it is an epoxy. It's just a resin epoxy, but the chemical reaction takes longer for it to take face. Just like your deep pour resin is an epoxy. It's just a different kind.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
It's also a function about what equipment you've got. If you've got the pressure pot to do a good job and get the bubbles out, then that can work. If you've got a big area, by far that's the way to go, because otherwise it's too hard to keep a 5-minute epoxy mixed up and covering everything and not have a divot someplace when you end up turning it again. That gives you another area to repair.
Yeah, I'm in Jim's boat. 5-minute for me, I'm too slow, so it ends up getting too hard by the time I get things down in there.
So somebody mentioned something that causes their tools to, I think, was it you, Dick, that you have to sharpen more often when to use carbide or traditional tools. Does a type of filler affect that in a lot of cases? Maybe it wasn't Dick, somebody.
Yeah, no.
The resin I find is very easy to turn. It doesn't mess up your tools very much. However, when you start to turn it, that's when you get those fine shavings, ribbon, and you don't want to let that go into your dust collector system and it'll plug it up. But other than that,
I find epoxy is hard to turn.
Yeah, and when you're dealing with your coppers, your turquoise, those will affect the sharpening. You will have to sharpen your tools more often than if you were to use carbide, because the item you're turning, the turquoise, the copper, it's a harder material.
Yeah, I find if you are sanding after, that the epoxy is so much harder than the wood, that you can get a little divot on each side of the epoxy where the wood's taken away, but the epoxy's still resisting being sanded. So you have to be careful with that one, sanding it.
Yeah, if I'm using turquoise or like a colored sand, I don't put it in until I'm done turning, and all I'm going to do is sand, so that way the stones don't mess up the tools, and all I'm doing is sanding it away. And you do have to watch with the softness of the wood, depending on the wood.
do you keep your stones down below the surface, Stan, when you do that?
No, I build it up till they're slightly above, and then I sand it down to where it's flush. And it's not turning. It's usually, the sander's on a drill, and I'm just touching the crack or, the surface of the stones until they're flush.
What else does somebody have this morning? Anything for show and tell? Oh,
Oh, okay.
say more, Dave.
These are Cindy Drozda tools, the pyramid tool and I forget what the other one is, for like fine detail for doing finials and stuff. I had a few extra dollars. Connie said I could spend.
Hold them up again.
So,
Is-
Dave, that's the Celtic knot technique you demonstrated at a Tuesday demo. Am I correct?
Yeah, this is actually the piece that I demoed. I finally got around to doing something with it. So I cut it in half and just made 2 handles. That was my project for the other day. Hey, has anybody seen this?
Tips and tricks.
No,
It's the AAW Tips and Tricks for Woodturners book. Very interesting. I was
I
showing
think-
this to,
I think
I
we
was
have it in
showing-
the library.
it's in the library. I was showing it to Chuck yesterday, and I think they're only about $10. I don't remember. But we talked about maybe getting a bunch of them and giving them away at the drawings, at the meetings. Neat book. I haven't read it yet, but it's a neat book. I looked at the pictures.
Do they have
Uh,
pages where you can color between the lines too?
yeah.
They have a coloring section in the back. That's why I got it. See, right here. I was gonna look real quick and see if they had anything on crack filling, but they don't really have a table of contents.
I
Well,
was
they do
gonna,
actually.
I was gonna mention, as long as we're talking about books, it reminded me that there is, well, it's backwards there, but there's a new edition of this out. Fixtures and Chucks by Doc Green. And I'll just plug it because I know Doc. I'm on a couple chats with him, and this is a new edition. A lot of people had the old edition.
I have the
Nice.
old edition and I like it very much. It's a
Mhm.
good, very good reference.
Does the new edition have many changes, Dick, or it's just an update?
No. The publisher, which is Fox Chapel, and they publish a lot of crafts books, they felt that the sales had kind of leveled off with the old one, and so they needed to kind of reinvigorate the sales. So, and he doesn't particularly like to write and photograph the stuff, and he was happy to be done with the first one, but they just imposed on him to put a couple new things in. So he's got that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good book. Both Ken and I have used it. So if anybody doesn't have it, it's a good one to have in your own library.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what else we got this morning?
Oh, I guess, I don't know if you announced it, Bruce, but next month, Tips and Grits will be on the first Thursday. Did you mention that?
I
rather
did
than the
not.
Second. Okay.
Thank you. Yep. Yeah, we got to move it back a week because a whole bunch of us are going to be traveling at the day it's normally scheduled. So,
So in March, it'll be on March 6th, correct?
correct.
I'm trying to keep attendance here, being the member guy.
Uh-huh.
And there's one participant with sugar, and I don't know who that is.
Jerry.
Jerry.
Jerry Sugars.
That'd be
Jerry
me.
Sugar. Oh, okay. Because I can't see him. So, oh, there you are. Now I know who you are.
Yeah, you don't need to see my face.
All right, but I got you on my list. All right.
All right. Well, if nobody's got anything else,
Well, Zim's been awful quiet over there. I don't know. Zim, you all right?
Talking to me?
Yeah, talking to you.
I'm just sitting here learning.
Okay.
This is my first time, so
Oh,
I was actually amazed that I could get on because this is my
man.
computer that I have on my engraver.
I'm surprised it does anything else but engrave.
Hey, I'm having fun. That's all that counts. Hang on, let me show you.
Oh, Zim went way down the rabbit hole with the laser. Oh, there you go. Beautiful.
It's 3 3/4 inches tall, and I don't recommend anybody do it unless you have patience, which I don't. But these little tiny pieces here are about 1/16 of an inch, and they bend and break. I had to run extra parts, so but it was a lot of fun. And
I just cut mine out last night. A lot of fun.
Yep. Well, that's my third one, so now I'm moving on to something else.
Got to figure out how to turn it though. I'm trying to fit it on the lathe. It's so far hasn't worked.
You got to turn it about 5,000,
Ah,
then it works real well.
So Ken, when you're using your copper powder, I know it comes in different, I don't know how fine the grain is. Are you using a really super fine copper powder, or is it a little more on the coarse side?
I'd have to go check, but yes, it comes in different grades. There are different sieve grades. What I've used, it was advised that you don't get the finest because then the CA won't find its way between the grains. If I'm remembering right, I think it's a 100. I don't know what the unit is they use, 100 mesh. And they have a more coarse material, they have a much finer material, but that 100, if I'm remembering correctly, works very well with a thin CA. And it allows the CA to get between the particles well enough to make it a nice solid mass.
I've got brass powder that is the very fine, and the thin CA glue, when you first drop it on there, will just sit on top, and it'll even roll off the side and run down the bowl. I've gotten to where I will put the CA glue in the crack, then pour the powder in, and that seems to break the surface tension, and then you can put the CA on top of it and it soaks right in. But if you just put it right on top of the powder, it just sits there.
Having seen Dave's handles with the Celtic knot that he did it reminded me that at one time I thought that turning decorative handles for your tools or even as presentation pieces would be a nice idea, and it would be something that you could even uh, get parts of kits from Rockler and stuff like that. So I did a handle that I've never used for anything, but
oh, look at that. That's awesome.
and one of the nice things is that with the way that it's designed, it's very nice ergonomically. You can put the head right under your elbow where you want it. It's a
Awesome.
very comfortable tool to use.
That is awesome.
Well, for a while, uh, people in the club used to make and use Arizona toothpicks, and I thought this would be the perfect handle for your Arizona toothpick.
Definitely. That's great.
Be a good tool handle for a chatter tool also.
Mm-hmm.
So I just checked my
Susan?
copper powder and it's 150 mesh. It works good. It's real fine.
Yeah. I went and grabbed mine. It's 100, they call it 100 grade. So that's 100 mesh. And
You went mute. Ken, you went mute.
You went mute.
Oh.
There you go.
mine is 100 grade. I bought 2 1-pound packages, and you don't need 2 of them. 1 pound goes a long ways. It's a grade 100. I bought them from Tucker's Turnings, and I believe he's down in Tucson. Yeah, he's in Tucson, Arizona. And it was something like roughly $18 for a pound. And this bag is a pound bag. That one has been used. It'll last a long, long time. So this is what you get as a 1 pound bag. The small jar that Dave has will still last you a long, long time. So if you
Yeah.
get just a few ounces, it would be sufficient. But I've been very pleased with this. They do sell, as I said, different meshes, but this 100 works quite well. Did that answer your question, Susan?
It did. And actually, the comments from everybody else helped because I was running into the problem of putting my copper powder in and then putting my CA and it's just sitting on top. And so trying to figure out how to get it down in. At one point, I tried to use like a toothpick and push it, but then all the copper stuck to the toothpick. So that didn't work.
They make those little pipette. They make those little pipette things, and you can suck some copper powder up in the pipette, and they have the really, really fine nozzles on it, and you can take the pipette and stick it kind of on the crack and kind of blow it and blow it down in the cracks. I think that'd work good too. Yeah, like Zem's got over there, little pipettes.
I'll see if I can give you
dust it
the
down in there in the cracks.
Anything else this morning?
you bear with me just a minute. I'll put this Tucker's Turnings web page in.
While Ken's doing that, if you hold something up, the way the video works is it captures and shows whoever is talking. So if you're holding something up and somebody else is talking, we see the person that's talking, not what you're trying to show.
Okay, I sent through the chat the contact information for Tucker's Turnings for this copper powder.
Very good.
This is Sean. Yeah, I was going to suggest Dean at school recommended Tucker's Turnings also.
Oh.
And for $4, you can get like 5 different types of powder. Well, turquoise, copper, you can pick different ones, and it's great to experiment. That's how I started, but I'm still learning. That's why I had a bunch of questions this morning. So, but you can get some nice samples for $4. It's pretty economical to take that journey.
Thank you for that, Sean. I had forgotten he does sell other powders and inlay materials too.
Yes.
Anything else this morning? If not, thank you all for joining. And don't forget, next month will be a week earlier, so we'll be the 6th. And we look forward to seeing you all then. Thanks for joining.